Let's do a thought experiment. Imagine a world where there's no government, no rule of law, no private property, and no police. What would that world look like? Go on, try and imagine it. Would there be peace and happiness? Or would there be violence and insecurity? Depending on the answer that you give, you might have a very optimistic or rather a quite pessimistic view on human nature. When Hobbes did this thought experiment, he drew a very bleak picture of our world without government. He argued that in such a world, our lives would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It's quite clear then that Hobbes didn't have the most optimistic view on human nature. Seeing as he wrote in the context of the English Civil War from the 1640s, this is not too surprising. Many actually argue that living through this series of bloody battles has heavily influenced Hobbes' political philosophy. But let's get back to this hypothetical world without government. In his work Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes gives a pretty detailed description of what he calls the state of nature. For starters, he says that in the state of nature everyone is equal. This sounds like Hobbes was way ahead of his time, and though in a sense he was, what he means here is that although we might differ in physical strength, that does not mean that overall one is stronger than the other. If you are bigger and stronger than I am, that does not mean that you're able to take my food from me. I could be much quicker and outrun you, or I could be very cunning and mislead you. The fact that we all have different strengths and talents does not make us unequal, Hobbes says. In fact, it makes us more equal. Our equality does not naturally bring peace and happiness, Hobbes argues. Especially because we are all equally capable, we also all compete for the similar ends that we seek. I want food to survive, you want food to survive. I want this one apple, you want this one apple. Do you think I'm gonna cut it in half and share it with you? No way. I'll fight you for the whole apple. Not surprisingly, Hobbes argues that in a state of nature we are all enemies. We become enemies because we all want to achieve the same thing, and that thing, Hobbes says, is our self-preservation. And since in a state of nature we all have a right to everything, we are in a perpetual state of war. Not a war as we imagine it today, but a war of each against everyone. We cannot trust anyone, and we need to attain the ends that ensure our own self-preservation. In a state of nature, we as individual human beings have all our rights. And since there is no common power and no law, there is no injustice. All is allowed in this anarchical state of nature. What you might notice here is the undeniable sense of the individual in Hobbes' thought. Unlike Aristotle, for whom the community is the central unit of analysis, Hobbes takes the individual as a starting point. This is one of the reasons why many argue that Hobbes can be seen as the father of our modern liberalism. The individual is not only central to Hobbes' conception of the state of nature, it is also central to the solution Hobbes proposes to this world of anarchy. Alright, so let's move on to this solution. Hobbes starts his argumentation with a central premise. He argues that humans are rational beings, that we are governed by our reason. Following our reason, we all implicitly follow what Hobbes calls the law of nature. This natural law that governs us, according to Hobbes, makes us refrain from doing anything that is destructive of our own lives. In other words, it is rational and natural for us to try everything to preserve our own lives. As I've said before, in a state of nature, everyone has a right to everything. If I feel like you are standing in the way of my self-preservation, I will probably be inclined to get you out of the way. And remember, in a state of nature, I have a right to take your life just as much as you have the right to take mine. This means that there never can be any security for any man. Everyone can take your life at any given moment. But, Hobbes argues, if we truly are rational beings, and if we truly want to avoid everything that is destructive to our lives, shouldn't we just want to escape this state of nature? Isn't it irrational to stay in this state of nature? Well, yes, Hobbes says, as rational beings we would want to seek peace, since a state of peace endangers our lives less than a state of perpetual war. So far so good. This sounds all logical, right? But how then should we achieve this peace? We all know this is easier said than done, don't we? Hobbes argues that we should contract our way into peace. That means that we should agree with each other, each with every other person, that we will lay down all our rights except for our right to self-defense. I shake hands on it with you, and we both shake hands on it with our other neighbor. We all have many contracts with each other, in which we promise to seek peace and follow it. In Hobbes' words. If you think that this is a good solution, if this is enough, then Hobbes would say, you have not understood human nature at all. We are selfish beings. If a chance occurs for me to be better off by making my neighbor worse off, I will not hesitate to take that chance and break the contract. So we shouldn't just lay aside all our rights for us to take up whenever it suits us. No, we should transfer our rights to a common power who then will keep us all in check. We should all agree, Hobbes says, to transfer our rights, all our rights except for the right to our own life, to this common power, to this sovereign. This sovereign then represents us and is allowed to use, for example, violence on our behalf. We tell the sovereign, here, take our rights, use them as you see fit to preserve the peace. What do you think this sovereign should be like? Since, as Hobbes says, nothing is more easily broken than a man's word, we should make sure to have a sovereign that keeps us in check. This sovereign should be fearsome, awe-inspiring, coercive. Only if we fear the sovereign, we will keep our promise. Hobbes calls this sovereign a Leviathan, after the terrific mythical figure. In the state of nature, we are all individuals, working for our own preservation. In a world under this coercive power, we are in a sense a body of people, a community, a nation, you could say. But don't be misled. This community is not natural, as it was for Aristotle. By choosing our representative, we create an artificial person, and this artificial person makes our body of people. When all individuals choose the Leviathan to be in control of them, they create an artificial unity. You might have guessed, this is a depiction of a rather autocratic regime. Despite the fact that we might not recognize this way of thinking about government and about representation in our own countries, it is undeniable that Hobbes has influenced many great thinkers and politicians over the last 3.5 centuries. What do you think about this argumentation? Is it convincing? And what can we learn from Hobbes about our current societies?